Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The last of the daylight thinned across the Wyoming foothills as Cole Hartley swung the axe down one final time, splitting a stubborn log that had held together longer than it should have. His breath came out in short clouds, and his arms ached from the steady rhythm he had kept since late afternoon. He gathered the pieces, stacking them in the neat pile against the cabin wall, each log placed carefully because he had learned not to waste motion or space. The air was dropping colder by the minute. Cole rubbed the back of his neck as he looked across the open stretch of land. Just long grass, packed dirt, and the faint silhouettes of distant hills. No sound but wind and the occasional shift of cattle. He liked it this way. Predictable. Quiet. A place where his thoughts didn't crowd him the way people did. Inside, he shut the door with a slow push and let the stove heat wrap around him. The cabin was small but sturdy. One bed, one table, one chair, shelves he had built himself. The lantern on the wall cast a warm glow that stretched across the boards and faded in the corners. He'd lived alone here long enough that the silence felt like part of the structure. He set his hat on the hook and reached for the kettle, planning to warm water for supper. His mind drifted through the evening ahead. Fix a broken strap, eat something simple, read a page or two from the old weather-beaten book by the bed. Nothing unusual, nothing that pressed on old memories. Then a noise interrupted everything. A knock. Soft, quick, uncertain. Cole froze instantly. His hand stilled on the kettle handle, and he listened hard. He wasn't expecting anyone. Visitors didn't come out this far unless they lost their way. Another knock followed, this one weaker, almost like the person wasn't sure if they should even try again. A cold tightening settled in Cole's chest. Trouble rarely arrived loud. It usually arrived exactly like this, quiet and hesitant. He set the kettle down and walked toward the door slowly, boots pressing lightly on the floorboards. His instincts sharpened. Years alone had taught him to be careful with surprises. He reached the door and paused, listening for footsteps, breathing, voices, anything. The wind brushed against the cabin, but nothing else. He unlatched the lock and opened the door a few inches. The lantern light pushed outside and caught the shape of a woman standing on the dirt. She wasn't from around here, and she wasn't all right. Her clothes were torn in several places, hanging unevenly from her shoulders. Bare feet pressed into the cold ground, red from wind and rough terrain. Her hair was long, tangled and sticking to her cheeks from sweat and cold. Her breathing was fast and shallow, like she had run until her body could no longer keep pace. She lifted her face slightly. Her eyes were dark, wide, and rimmed with exhaustion. Those eyes told him more than anything else. She had been fleeing something, and she had run out of ground to flee on. When she spoke, her voice cracked. "I want to give birth to a white baby. Please let me in." The words hit Cole in a way he didn't show. His expression didn't change, but something inside him did. Not because of the request, but because of the desperation wrapped around it. He saw her jaw trembling, the way she held her shawl tightly, as though expecting him to tear it away. Her whole body looked ready to collapse. Cole had seen fear many times. Men in fights, horses during storms, cattle during floods. But this was different. This fear was quiet, brittle, and close to breaking. He stepped back without speaking. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a simple movement that told her she could enter. He kept enough distance so she didn't feel forced. Taya stepped inside slowly, almost like she didn't trust her legs to hold her. Cole closed the door carefully so the wind wouldn't chill the room. The warmth from the stove reached her in small waves, and she paused, letting her body settle enough to breathe normally again. Her hand shook as she held her shawl against her chest. She expected him to ask something from her. She expected anger or demand. Cole could see it plainly. Instead, he walked to the stove, opened the firebox, and added wood. The flames grew brighter, casting stronger light across her tired face. He moved with slow, patient motions, not wanting to startle her. He pointed to the chair closest to the stove. "Sit there. Warmer," he said. His voice was low, steady. He made it simple so she wouldn't misinterpret anything. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to him. searching for hidden meaning. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her. He just waited. Finally, she sat, pulling the blanket from the chair over her shoulders. Her breathing steadied a little. The firelight softened the tension in her face. She kept watching him, though, every move, every step, as if trying to decide if she had walked into safety or another danger. "My name is Taya," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the stove instead of him. Cole nodded once. Wholeheartedly. He filled the kettle and set it near the heat. No questions. No acquiescence. He could ask why she came. He could ask what she meant. He could ask who was chasing her. But she looked like someone who had been forced to talk too much already. So he gave her the one thing she needed most, quiet that didn't hurt. As the fire crackled, Cole watched her out of the corner of his eye, seeing how tightly she held the blanket, seeing how she kept her feet tucked under her, as if bracing for someone to grab her. Inside his chest, old memories pushed at him, times he had failed to save someone, times he had arrived too late. But he pushed them back down. This moment wasn't about him. He made her tea when the water warmed, set the cup near her hand without touching her, then stepped back. Taya looked at the cup for a long moment before lifting it with shaking fingers. The heat surprised her. She blinked hard, a slight tremor in her chin. She was holding herself together by a thin thread. Cole could see that clearly now. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The stove warmed the cabin. The wind pressed gently against the walls outside, and the firelight flickered across two strangers who understood the same thing in different ways. Sometimes survival came down to a single door staying open. Taya woke before dawn, her eyes snapping open in the dim light of the cabin. For a few seconds she didn't breathe, unsure of where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't the rough canvas of a shelter or the branches of a tree. It was solid wood, worn smooth from years of living, and the air around her carried warmth instead of cold wind. She pushed herself up slowly. Her body ached in every place she expected, but the ache was from exhaustion, not bruises. The blanket Cole had given her was still wrapped around her shoulders, and the bed she lay on was soft compared to the ground she had grown used to. She hadn't meant to fall asleep there. She'd intended to stay awake, watching the door, waiting for danger. But her body had given up the moment she felt heat. Cole sat near the window on a low stool, the faint dawn light outlining his shape. He was cleaning a rifle with slow, practiced movements, cloth running along the barrel in steady strokes. He didn't look over at her right away. He gave her a moment to adjust, to remember, to feel safe. She watched him, unsure how much she was allowed to move. She didn't want to disturb him, didn't want him to think she was taking too much space. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Cole finally spoke, his voice calm and low. "Water's in the basin. Bread on the table. Eat if you need." He said it plainly, without expectation, and went back to cleaning the weapon. Taya rose slowly from the bed, her legs stiff at first. She tested the floor with her feet, wincing slightly when she felt the cold through the boards. Her bare feet made soft sounds as she crossed to the basin. She washed her face carefully, letting the cool water bring her fully awake. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the lingering instinct to stay hidden. Every movement felt like something she had earned. She glanced at Cole again, but he stayed focused on his task, his expression calm, his posture easy. He wasn't watching her like she was prey or property. That alone unsettled her in a way she didn't know how to express. At the table, she picked up a piece of bread and ate slowly, unsure she should save some for later. Instinct told her food was never guaranteed. She chewed quietly and kept glancing at the door, as if expecting the silence to break at any second. Cole finished cleaning the rifle and stood. The chair legs made a low scrape on the floor, and Taya tensed before she could stop herself. Cole noticed, pausing halfway through putting on his coat. "You're safe here," he said. No softness, no emphasis, just a steady fact. She nodded quickly but didn't speak. When he stepped outside, he left the door cracked open an inch. Not enough for the cold to flood in, but enough to show he wasn't locking her in. That small gesture hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't sure if he meant it that way, but it felt like freedom. She finished eating, then looked around the cabin. She didn't want to sit and do nothing. She needed to prove she wasn't a burden. She folded the blanket neatly, then swept the floor with quick, quiet strokes, clearing dust and bits of bark left from the night. She washed the mug and set it carefully on the table. By the time she finished, Cole returned, carrying a small sack of feed on his shoulder. His boots were coated in frost, and his breath came out in white puffs. Taya stepped back automatically, unsure if she should be in his way. "I will work," she said suddenly, her voice tightening with the need to make him understand. "You let me stay. I work for you." Cole set the feed sack down near the stove. He studied her for a moment, not suspiciously, not coldly, but trying to understand why she looked ready to run even while standing indoors. "You don't owe me anything," he said. The words confused her more than anything else he'd said. Her brow tightened. "I didn't come here for free." She swallowed hard. "I can cook. I can clean. I can help outside." Cole picked up a tin cup, turned it in his hand, and answered in that same calm tone. "Help if you want. Not because you have to." Her chest tightened. Kindness with no price felt dangerous. She stepped back, needing distance so her mind could make sense of it. But she forced herself forward again. "Show me what you do." He looked at her bare feet, at the cold creeping under the door, then crouched by a crate near the wall. He pulled out a pair of thick wool socks and old boots with worn soles. He set them on the ground in front of her. Too cold without these. She stared at the boots for several seconds, unable to move. No one gave her anything without taking something in return. She waited for him to say what he wanted. When he didn't, she lowered herself to the floor and slipped the socks on, then the boots. They were size too big, but warm. "Thank you," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. Cole only nodded. Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks immediately, but the boots protected her feet well enough. She followed Cole to the barn, careful to keep some distance. He showed her how to carry hay in small bundles so she didn't strain her arms, demonstrating slowly and waiting for her to mimic the motion. When she did, he gave a small nod and moved on. They spent the morning working this way, quietly, side by side, each learning the other's pace. Cole didn't speak unless he needed to explain something. Taya didn't speak unless she needed direction. By midday, her breathing grew steadier, her steps more confident. By afternoon, she realized she had gone several hours without feeling hunted. And when the sun dipped low and they returned to the cabin, Cole opened the door first and stepped aside, letting her enter without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, she crossed a threshold without fear sitting on her shoulders. Night settled over the foothills slowly, the kind of cold quiet that seeped into every gap in the cabin walls and made the stove's glow feel heavier and more important. Taya sat on the floor close to the heat, her legs drawn in and her hands wrapped around the cup Cole had given her. The tea inside had cooled, but she held it anyway because the warmth helped keep her thoughts steady. Cole sat at the small table across the room, the lantern between them throwing a soft halo of light over the leather strap he was repairing. He worked with careful, methodical movements, thread through, pull tight, check the edge, smooth it with his thumb. His focus never wavered. Even when she shifted or the fire clicked loudly, he remained steady. Taya watched him from behind the rim of the cup. Not openly, just enough to study how he carried himself. He looked like a man who had learned to make every motion deliberate. A man who didn't talk unless the words mattered. His silence wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. It was the kind that stayed out of the way so someone else could breathe. That made things harder for her, somehow. She wasn't used to kindness that didn't ask anything back. She put the cup down slowly. "Cole." He didn't look up right away, but his hands paused on the strap to show he was listening. "I should tell you why I'm here." Still no rush from him. He sat back in the chair a little, giving her room to speak, but not pushing for it. The lantern light caught the slight shift in his expression. Patient, attentive, nothing more. Taya's fingers tightened in her lap. Her shoulders instinctively curled inward as the memories rose up, heavy and sharp. She didn't know where to start, but she forced herself to breathe and let the words come one at a time. "My people cast me out." Cole lifted his gaze then, eyes steady but unreadable. The fire crackled softly between them. "They wanted me to belong to an older man," she continued. "I refused. He had power, influence, enough that no one argued with him. Her voice roughened. She looked down at her hands, her thumb rubbing hard against her palm as she spoke faster, needing to get it out before her courage slipped. They said I shamed the tribe, that I defied a choice I was not allowed to defy. I left, but some followed. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They chased me for days, she whispered. Not to bring me home, to punish me, to take what they wanted, to say no woman should walk free after refusing a claim. She forced herself to look at him then, her eyes a mix of fear and shame. I thought if I came to a white man's door and offer myself, I thought that was the only thing that might keep them away. Cole didn't move, not an inch. He didn't flinch at the harshness of her story, didn't pity her, didn't recoil. He absorbed every word the way a man listens to something that deserves space, not interruption. He finally spoke, voice low and steady. You're safe here. She swallowed. You don't even know me. You're safe here, he repeated, the same tone, the same quiet certainty. The simplicity of the words hit her harder than she expected. Her chest tightened with something unfamiliar, relief that felt like it didn't belong to her. She looked back at the stove, blinking fast to keep her expression controlled. She hated being weak in front of anyone, even someone who didn't judge her. Cole reached for the leather strap again, but he didn't look away from her this time. You said those words at my door because you were desperate. I understand that. She nodded slowly. You didn't take them. That truth hung heavily in the small space. Cole returned to his work, but his voice stayed level and open. I didn't take you in for that. Taya lowered her head. A long moment passed where neither spoke. The fire shifted, sending a faint glow across her cheek. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease a little, not because she believed everything was fine, but because she believed he meant what he said. She pulled the blanket tighter around her and let out a slow breath she didn't know she'd been holding. I didn't think a man like you existed. Cole didn't answer, but the silence that followed was different from the one that used to frighten her. It wasn't waiting to swallow her. It wasn't measuring her worth. It simply existed, steady and warm, filling the space between two people who had survived too much in different ways. Taya leaned back slightly, letting her body rest. She didn't trust sleep, not yet, but she trusted the room enough to close her eyes for a moment. Cole watched her briefly, her slow breathing, her exhaustion, the way her body finally began to let go of the constant tension. And then he looked away again, focusing on the strap with renewed purpose. He wasn't fixing leather anymore. He was making sure she had something stable to hold on to in the days ahead. The next few days settled into a rhythm neither of them expected, but both slipped into naturally. The Wyoming mornings came cold and sharp, thin frost clinging to the grass outside, making the ground crunch under Cole's boots as he stepped out to start chores. The first day, Taya stayed near the cabin, uncertain if she should follow. By the third morning, she was already pulling on the oversized boots before Cole even reached the door. Cole noticed. He didn't comment. He simply held the door open a moment longer so she could pass through without rushing. Outside, the air felt clean but biting. Their breath drifted in pale clouds as they walked toward the barn. Cole kept a few steps ahead, but he slowed just enough to let her match his pace. The land stretched wide in all directions, open grass, distant hills, scattered sagebrush. Taya scanned it constantly, her eyes jumping from ridge to ridge, old instincts refusing to rest completely. Cole saw it in her body language, shoulders always slightly pulled inward, hands ready to grab the coat tighter. He didn't tell her to relax. He knew it wouldn't help. Instead, he showed her the tasks that anchored him every morning. This latch sticks, he said when they reached the barn door. He pushed it up with his thumb before sliding it open. If you force it, you'll crack the hinge. Taya nodded, committing it to memory. Inside, the barn smelled of warm hay and dust. The horses shifted lightly in their stalls, their ears flicking at the sound of footsteps. Cole grabbed a pitchfork and handed her a smaller one. He didn't mention that he chose the lighter tool on purpose. He just placed it near her and stepped back. Work slow. Don't strain your back. She nodded again. For a while, the only sounds were hay brushing against wood, the soft thud of feed hitting troughs, and the occasional snort from one of the horses. Cole moved with long, practiced motions, every action measured. Taya watched him closely, copying each movement with caution until her hands began to move more confidently. When she carried a bundle of hay too heavy for her, Cole didn't correct her with words. He simply walked over, quietly took half the load, and let her carry the rest without making her feel weak. She responded with a small, grateful breath she didn't voice out loud. They repaired fence lines next. Cole walked slowly, pointing out splintered posts and loose wires. "Don't grab the wire near the edge," he said. "It cuts easy." She listened closely. Cole noticed how quickly she learned, how she adjusted her grip, how she tested the tension before pulling, how she waited a beat longer before approaching a horse. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to take up space. Every action she did carried caution, shaped by years of being told not to step out of line. Around midday, he paused near the porch and handed her a canteen. She took it with both hands, drinking in small sips, careful not to take too much. Cole watched her for a moment, seeing the hesitation. "You can drink more," he said. "There's plenty." She hesitated again, then finally nodded and took a deeper drink. Inside the cabin, Taya swept the floor, rearranging the blanket, and warmed leftover beans on the stove. She didn't wait for instructions. She moved with purpose, trying to repay the safety she didn't yet believe she deserved. Cole ate without complaint, not because the food was perfect, but because she had made it. During the afternoon chores, she brought him water again. The moment she held out the cup, Cole paused mid-hammer stroke on the porch rail, taking it with a small nod of appreciation. "Thank you," he said. The words caught her fully this time. She froze for a second. A thank you was something she had not heard from a man who wasn't demanding anything afterward. She lowered her gaze quickly, hiding the warmth creeping into her expression, and returned inside before he could say anything else. When the day finally wound down, the two of them sat near the stove again. Taya sat on the floor, weaving the edge of her shawl back together with a needle she found in Cole's wooden box. Cole sat at the table, his boots crossed at the ankles, sharpening a small knife. The fire glowed steady. The silence between them was not tense anymore. It wasn't heavy. It just filled the space gently, settling into the cracks of the room like something the cabin had been waiting for. At one point, Cole looked over and spoke quietly. "You did good work today." Taya kept her eyes on the thread she was pulling through the fabric. "I just don't want to be a burden." Cole watched her hands for a moment. "You're not." The simple certainty in his tone made her pause. She swallowed hard and nodded once, unable to form a reply that wouldn't crack her voice. Later, when the lantern dimmed and Cole moved to check the stove one last time before bed, he noticed Taya sitting with her back against the wall, eyes half closed, shoulders finally lowered. She wasn't asleep yet, but she looked close, like her body was learning how to rest again, piece by piece. Cole didn't disturb her. He let her have the moment. He understood how rare it must have felt. Outside, the wind brushed against the cabin. Inside, for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like something closing in. It felt like a life slowly forming, one shared task, one shared silence, one small moment at a time. The weather shifted overnight. By morning, a thin layer of frost covered the ground in a pale sheet, breaking softly under their steps as Cole and Taya walked toward the barn. The air bit at their cheeks, sharp enough to remind them that winter was not far away. Taya wrapped herself tighter in Cole's spare coat, the sleeves hanging past her wrists, but the warmth inside it steadied her breathing. The routine had become familiar: water for the horses, feed for the cattle, checking gates and latches. Taya followed Cole's movements with more confidence, her body learning the pace of ranch life. She wasn't as jumpy. She no longer paused at every small sound. She kept her eyes forward and her steps firm. But Cole had spent too many years alone on this land not to notice when something felt off. He paused near the western fence line, staring toward the low ridge where the land sloped unevenly before descending into brush. The frost there looked disturbed, broken in places where it should have been smooth. Cole narrowed his eyes, taking a slow breath through his nose. Taya caught up to him, stopping at his side. Something wrong. Cole didn't answer right away. He scanned the distance again before pointing with 2 fingers. Tracks, he said quietly. Not mine. Taya's stomach tightened. Her hand instinctively curled around the edge of her coat. How many? 2, Cole answered. Maybe 3. Hard to tell from this angle. Her breath hitched, and Cole glanced at her, seeing the fear return. The same fear she carried the day she arrived at his door, the kind that lived under her skin even when she tried to hide it. He spoke calmly. They didn't come close. Stopped at the ridge. Looking, she whispered. Maybe, he said, or passing through. He didn't believe that, and she could tell. Cole had a careful way of choosing his words, but his eyes were honest. Taya stepped closer to the fence, looking out across the long stretch of land. The cold air pressed against her face as she searched for any sign of movement. Nothing stirred now, not a horse, not a man, not even a bird. But the ridge felt heavier than usual, as though eyes had been there recently. I shouldn't have come here, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. I brought danger. Cole shook his head once. They don't get to decide that. Taya tightened her grip on the fence rail. They won't stop. Cole's jaw flexed. I know. He didn't say it lightly. He said it like a man who had made a decision long before he spoke it. For the rest of the morning, Taya worked quieter than usual, glancing at the ridge every few minutes. Each time she looked, Cole noticed, and each time, he made sure to position himself between her and the open land. When they returned to the cabin for a midday meal, the air inside felt warmer but tense. Taya set a pot of beans on the stove, her hands moving quickly and unevenly. She dropped the spoon once, and it clattered against the floor harder than it should have. She froze, bracing for an angry reaction she expected from men. Cole picked up the spoon and set it on the table without a word. His silence wasn't dismissive. It was solid, grounding, telling her she hadn't done anything wrong. Eat something, he said. You worked hard. She sat slowly, her breath shaky. Cole ate with his usual steady pace, but every now and then his eyes drifted to the window. Not with fear, just a watchfulness shaped by years of surviving. If someone was coming, he wanted to know before they were close. After they finished, Cole stood and put on his coat. I'm walking the ridge, he said. Taya's body stiffened. I'll help. Cole shook his head. No, stay here where it's warm. She stood anyway. I can help. Cole looked at her fully now, not as someone fragile, but as someone carrying too much weight already. You help by staying safe, he said in a steady, low tone. I'll be back soon. The firmness in his voice wasn't control, it was protection, a kind she didn't know how to receive. She lowered her eyes and nodded, stepping back toward the stove. Outside, Cole walked the fence line with deliberate steps, eyes scanning every patch of disturbed earth. He crouched beside the old tracks, brushing frost from the ground with his glove. The prints were clearer here, 2 men on horseback, circling slowly, watching, looking for someone. His stomach tightened. When he returned to the cabin, Taya sat by the stove, staring at the flames with a distant expression. The tension in her shoulders told him she had already imagined every worst possibility. They didn't cross the fence, Cole said as he walked inside, removing his gloves. They were only looking. Taya swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. They won't stop with looking. Cole hung his coat on the nail, then turned toward her. I know, he said again, but you're not alone anymore. That matters. She looked at him then, her eyes filled with fear, but also something quieter, something that felt almost like trust trying to form beneath the fear. What if they come back, she asked. Cole's answer came without hesitation. Then I'll deal with it. Not a threat, not a shout, just a calm promise from a man who meant every word. Taya pulled the blanket tighter around herself. For the first time in her life, someone's certainty didn't scare her. It steadied her. As the evening settled, the ridge remained quiet, but neither of them forgot what they'd seen. The danger was still out there. The tracks were still fresh. But so was something new inside the cabin. Something slow and steady forming between 2 people who had never expected anything from each other. The wind pushed gently against the shutters. Cole checked the stove one last time. Taya moved closer to the fire, her body finally relaxing enough to breathe evenly. Outside, the ridge stayed still. Inside, for the first time since her arrival, she didn't brace for the worst. Because now she wasn't facing it alone. 2 days passed with a thin, uneasy calm sitting over the land. The frost stayed heavy in the mornings, and the wind carried that quiet whistle it made before snowstorms. Cole and Taya worked as usual, feeding the horses, breaking ice in the water trough, checking the barn roof for loose boards. But every time the wind shifted, both of them lifted their heads at the same moment, listening. Taya tried not to show how much the tracks on the ridge haunted her, but it clung to her anyway. She moved through chores faster than she needed to, keeping her eyes on the hills more than the work in her hands. Cole noticed. He slowed his own pace on purpose, keeping her within his line of sight at all times. By the second afternoon, Cole tightened the last plank on the porch rail and straightened slowly. His shoulders stiffened. Hoofbeats, not distant like travelers. Close, controlled, not in a hurry. Men who believed they had a right to ride onto another man's land. Taya froze near the woodpile, her hands clenching around a bundle of kindling. She looked toward Cole, and he gave her one short nod. Stay behind him. He walked out to the edge of the porch, his boots thudding quietly against the boards. He didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his rifle yet. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, broad-shouldered, calm, steady, watching the ridge. 3 riders emerged over the rise. Their horses moved at a slow, deliberate pace, hooves crunching frost underfoot. The men wore worn coats and carried rifles tied to their saddles. The middle rider, older, heavy-set, jaw-tight, rode a little ahead of the others, his presence loud, even in silence. Taya stepped closer to the porch doorway, staying behind Cole, but watching the men with tense, wide eyes. She recognized their posture, their confidence, the way they scanned the land, not curious, but claiming. Cole felt her breath hitch behind him. He lifted the rifle from its place by the door, not raising it, just holding it naturally across his chest. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop just short of the fence line. "We're looking for a girl," the man called out. His voice carried easily across the land. Apache, young, ran from her people. Cole didn't answer right away. He scanned the 3 riders carefully, noting how their hands hovered near their belts but didn't draw. Their horses shifted, picking up on the tension. Finally, Cole spoke, his voice even. "No one here belongs to you." The man's expression tightened. "She's not yours to keep." Cole shifted his stance, just slightly, planting his feet. "She's not yours to take." A flicker of frustration flashed across the man's eyes. She broke tradition. She shamed her tribe, and she owes a debt. Cole's gaze sharpened. He didn't raise the rifle, but the way he held it changed, firmer, more deliberate. She owes nothing to men who chase her down like an animal. Taya's breath trembled behind him. She pressed her hands to the doorframe, steadying herself. The men exchanged looks, but none moved forward. The lead rider tried again. "You don't want trouble." Cole stepped down one porch step, just one, and the movement carried more weight than a shout. "I'm not inviting trouble," Cole said quietly, "but I'll meet it if it comes closer." The air tightened. One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, testing the boundary. Cole's eyes locked on him instantly. The rider froze. Silence stretched long enough that Taya felt her heartbeat in her throat. Finally, the lead rider exhaled sharply through his nose. He pulled on the reins, turning his horse away from the fence. "Wasn't worth riding all this way anyway," the man muttered. "Let the girl rot here. She'll bring you nothing but risk." Cole didn't answer. The 3 riders turned their horses and left the way they came, their figures shrinking against the ridge until they disappeared over the top, leaving only the sound of wind brushing the grass. Cole waited several long seconds, rifle still in hand, making sure they were truly gone. Only then did he step back onto the porch. Taya's hands were shaking as she steadied herself against the doorframe. Her breath came fast and uneven, but her eyes were fixed on Cole, searching, overwhelmed, grateful, afraid of what this meant. "You didn't have to," she began, voice cracking. Cole finally looked at her fully. His voice came low and steady. "They won't cross this fence." She swallowed hard. But if they come back, they'll still find me here, Cole said, standing the same way. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something heavier and unfamiliar settling inside her. Safety she didn't know how to hold yet. Cole lowered the rifle and leaned it inside the doorway before moving past her to hang his coat. He gave her space to breathe, not crowding her with questions or comfort. He simply existed beside her, solid and certain. Taya's voice came quiet, barely above a whisper. I thought no man would ever stand for me. Not after everything. Cole didn't turn around, but the slight stillness in his posture told her he heard every word. You're safe, he said again. Not dramatic, not emotional, just true. Outside, the ridge sat quiet again. Inside, Taya's fear finally loosened its grip, slowly, steadily, because someone had chosen to stand with her, not claim her. That changed everything. The snow came lightly that morning, small flakes drifting across the open yard and settling on the railings of the porch. The storm from a night before had passed, leaving a cold brightness behind it. Cole stepped out to split firewood, and Taya stood in the doorway wrapped in his coat, watching him with a calmness that hadn't been there before. The men were gone, for now at least, but something in Taya had shifted after Cole faced him down without hesitation. The sharp fear that used to live just under her skin had loosened, giving her room to breathe again. She still watched the ridge from time to time, but she no longer braced at every sound. She no longer waited for someone to grab her by the arm and pull her away. She moved more freely in the cabin now, her steps lighter, her voice steadier. She didn't feel like she was intruding anymore. She felt like the space slowly learned her presence. After the morning chores, Cole came back to the cabin, brushing snow from his shoulders. Taya had already set water on the stove, warming it for washing. She didn't glance up immediately, but the slight easing in her shoulders when she heard his boots told him everything. She recognized the sound as safety. Cole removed his gloves and set them near the stove to dry. You've been busy, he said. I like to keep the place clean, she replied, not lifting her head. It helps me think. He understood that. He'd spent years sweeping, fixing, and working just to keep his mind from drifting into dark places. Taya turned then, her fingers twisting lightly around the edge of her shawl. She watched the snow fall outside the window for a moment before speaking. Cole, she said softly, can I ask something? He nodded once. She hesitated, gathering the courage that had become easier to find in him. Do you want me here? Not just until the danger passes. I mean, do you want me to stay? Cole didn't answer immediately. He wasn't a man who spoke without thinking. He set the kettle down carefully and leaned his hand on the table, studying her with the same measured calm he used for everything important. You work hard, he said. You respect the land. You don't take more than you need. And you don't run when things get difficult. Taya lowered her eyes. I'm used to running. He shook his head. Not anymore. She looked up sharply at that, searching his face for meaning. Cole stepped closer, not invading her space, just closing enough distance that she didn't have to raise her voice to hear him. I want you here, he said quietly. If you choose to be. Her breath caught, not from fear, from relief, from being given a choice when she had lived so long without one. She stepped back and sat slowly on the edge of the bed, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The silence between them felt different now. Something warmer, something careful but steady. After a long moment, she whispered, I want to stay. Not because I owe you anything. Not because I'm afraid. Because here feels different. Cole took one breath, slow and deep, letting the words settle. Then he answered, then stay. No ceremony. No grand speech. Just a man stating something honest. Taya nodded once, her eyes stinging as she fought to keep her voice even. Thank you. Cole moved to the stove, checking the fire with calm, practiced motions, giving her space to gather herself. But the slight shift of his shoulders, lighter somehow, told her that her choice meant something to him too. Later, they worked the afternoon routine together. Taya fed the horses, brushing their manes with slow, careful motions. Cole reinforced the barn door, glancing at her now and then, noticing how her posture had changed, No more hunched shoulders, no more bracing for someone to grab her from behind. As the sun dipped low behind the ridge, Taya carried the last bucket of water into the cabin. She set it down and paused at the doorway, watching Cole a moment longer than usual. He stood on the porch, scanning the horizon, his figure steady against the faint glow of evening. He wasn't looking for danger this time. He was simply making sure the day had ended clean. Taya stepped forward, her voice soft but certain. "Cole." He turned slightly. She walked toward him, her steps careful but confident, and stood beside him on the porch. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. She looked out at the land the way he did. "This place," she whispered. "It feels like it could be home." Cole nodded once. "It can be." And for the first time since she fled her old life, the thought didn't scare her. It steadied her. She breathed in the cold air, letting it settle inside her with something close to hope. As the last light faded behind the ridge, the two of them stood side by side, silent but connected by something slow and honest, an understanding that neither had expected, but neither wanted to let go of. The cabin behind them glowed warm through the window. The land stretched wide and quiet in front of them, and for the first time, Taya felt she was where she was meant to be. The next morning carried a stillness that felt different from the days before. The sky hung low but clear, pale in a way that promised cold without warning of storm. Taya stepped onto the porch in Cole's coat, her breath showing white in the air, and watched him saddle the horse with calm, practiced hands. He didn't usually make preparations this early. He didn't usually keep glancing toward her with a quiet decision already forming in his eyes. When he tightened the last strap, he stepped toward her, brushing a bit of frost from his beard. "We're going to town today," he said simply. Taya's fingers curled into the sleeves of the coat. "Why?" Cole didn't hesitate. "Because you chose to stay." Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something thick and warm she didn't know how to name. He added, "If you want to belong here, truly belong, we should make it known. The Reverend's in town. Folks there mind their own business. No one will question anything." Taya lowered her head, trying to steady the rush of emotion. Belonging had never been something she was offered. Not like this. Not with choice. Not with dignity. Her voice came quiet. "You want this too?" Cole met her eyes fully. "Yes." That one word steadied every part of her that had been drifting. They rode slowly across the open land, the cold air brushing their faces, the horses' hooves sinking into patches of melting snow. Taya held onto the back of the saddle, not gripping too tightly, trusting the steadiness of Cole's posture in front of her. Each step of the horse felt like a quiet declaration that the life she ran from was gone behind her. The settlement was small, 2 long streets, a handful of wooden buildings, a livery, a store, and a small church with white paint peeling under the sun. As they approached, a couple of townsfolk paused to look, but no one spoke. Cole nodded politely when needed, but he didn't linger. He led Taya straight toward the church. Inside, the faint smell of old wood and burning oil greeted them. The church was empty except for the aging reverend sweeping near the front pews. He looked up, eyebrows raising a little at the sudden visitors. "Well now," the reverend said, clearing his throat, "didn't expect company this early." Cole stepped closer, his voice calm. "We're here to be married." The reverend blinked, then nodded quickly. Course. I can do that." Taya stood still near the doorway, her hands tightening slightly around the edge of the shawl she had brought. She watched Cole more than the reverend, needing to see confirmation in his face. When Cole looked at her, his expression softened just enough to reassure her. 2 neighbors who had been walking by stepped inside when they saw the open door. They nodded a greeting to Cole and took seats quietly in the back without asking questions. Cole was respected in these parts. If he brought someone to be wed, there was no judgment to offer. Taya moved to stand beside him at the front of the church. The reverend opened his worn book, the cracked leather cover flaking at the edges. His voice trembled slightly with age, but his words were clear. Marriage is a bond formed by choice, meant to bring steadiness in hard times and company in quiet ones. Taya's heart beat hard against her ribs. The reverend's words felt heavy and real. She searched Cole's face again, looking for doubt or hesitation. There was none. only the same calm certainty that carried him through every decision. Cole Hartley, the Reverend asked, "Do you take this woman as your lawful wife?" Cole's voice came low, steady, absolute. "Ido." Taya swallowed hard. Her hands were cold, but her breath felt warm in her chest. "And you, Taya," the Reverend continued, "do you take this man as your lawful husband?" She hesitated, not from fear, but from feeling the weight of what she was choosing. The life she fled flashed through her mind, the chase, the cold, the desperation. Then she looked up at Cole, the man who opened his door without asking for anything, the man who stood between her and danger without expecting praise. Her voice steadied. "Ido." The Reverend closed the book with a soft pat. "Then by the power granted to me, I pronounce you husband and wife." For a moment, neither moved. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, just letting the truth settle between them. Taya breathed out slowly, her body easing as she realized. Not only was she no longer hunted, she belonged somewhere now. She belonged with someone who chose her without owning her. Cole placed his hat back on his head and opened the door for her. "Let's go home." Home. The word felt heavier than any vow. They rode back through the cold afternoon with the wind brushing at their coats. Taya leaned slightly against Cole's back, not out of fear of falling, but because something in her had finally unlocked enough to allow closeness. When they reached the cabin, the sky had turned a soft gray. Cole dismounted and helped her down from the horse with a steady hand under her elbow. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it held a quiet care she felt down to her bones. Inside, she lit the lantern while Cole built a fire. The flames spread quickly, warming the room with a steady glow. The cabin looked the same as every night before, but everything felt different now. Like the walls, the stove, the bed, the table, all of it had changed meaning. Taya set her shawl down carefully and turned toward him. "So, this is our home now." Cole nodded once. "It is." And for the first time, she let herself smile, a small, fragile smile, but real. Cole's chest tightened, not painfully, but in a way that made him feel something shift inside him too. Something he hadn't let himself feel in years. They didn't say more that night. It didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer the quiet of strangers or survival. It was the silence of two people standing on the first steady ground either had known in a long time. Spring crept into the Wyoming foothills slowly, spreading across the land in uneven patches of thawed earth and new grass. The snow melted in thin lines along the fence posts, dripping steadily into the soil. The air carried a cold edge in the mornings, but by afternoon it warmed enough to carry the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. The cabin looked different now, not in its structure, but in the way it felt lived in. A second blanket folded neatly near the bed. A small woven satchel Taya had made hanging beside Cole's hat. 2 cups on the table instead of one. Quiet changes that turned the place from a shelter into a home. Taya sat on the porch wrapped in Cole's coat, her hands resting gently over the soft curve of her belly. The early sun lit the land in pale gold, and she watched it with a calm that had taken months to fully grow inside her. She felt warmth spread beneath her palm each time the child shifted, a reminder of the life that would soon join theirs. Cole stepped out of the cabin a moment later, closing the door behind him with a slow, careful motion so it wouldn't startle her. He carried a mug of warm tea in one hand, steam curling upward in the cool air. When he reached her, he offered the cup without a word. She took it with both hands, her fingers brushing briefly against his. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and leaned against the porch rail, one boot braced on the step below. The wind moved lightly across the open land, brushing past them without urgency. Cole scanned the ridge out of habit, but his shoulders weren't tense the way they once had been. The land was quiet. The danger had passed. The men who once searched for her had not returned, and even if they did, Cole knew exactly where he would stand. Taya sipped her tea and let out a long, contented breath. "The child is strong," she said, feeling a small flutter under her hand. Cole looked at her more fully now, his eyes warming in a way he rarely let show. "You look stronger, too." She lowered her gaze, cheeks warming, but she didn't look away in fear, only in modesty. "It's easier to breathe here," she admitted. "Easier to sleep. Easier to feel safe." Cole turned slightly, his voice steady. "You are safe. Both of you." A quiet settled between them. Comfortable, steady, familiar. They had spent months communicating through silence, gestures, shared routines, and the unspoken understanding that neither needed loud words to say something important. Taya reached out and placed her hand near his on the porch rail. She didn't take it, just placed it close enough that he knew she wanted him near. Cole slowly moved his hand until their fingers touched, and she let her palm soften against his. The land around them was still waking from winter. Birds called from the fence posts, and the gentle rustle of grass traveled in soft waves across the yard. Inside the cabin, a small cradle Cole had built sat near the bed. Simple, sturdy, made with hands that understood the meaning of building something that would hold new life. Taya looked at the horizon and spoke quietly. "I never thought I would live long enough to have peace, or a husband, or a child that would grow without fear." Cole shifted closer, the boards creaking under his weight. "You'll have all of that here." Taya turned her head, studying his profile, the sun-cut lines around his eyes, the calm strength in his posture, the way his presence steadied her without effort. "I didn't know men like you existed," she whispered. "Men who stay." Cole breathed out slowly, the weight of old memories passing through him for a moment. "I didn't think I'd have reason to stay again." Their eyes met, and the truth settled between them. Two lives that had been shaped by loss now held together by choice. Taya leaned her shoulder gently against his arm, letting her body rest in the quiet space they shared. Cole didn't move away. He never did. He remained a steady, solid presence, one she had come to trust more deeply than she trusted her own instincts. "He'll grow here," she said softly, her hand circling her belly. "Our child." "He will," Cole replied, "with no one chasing him, with no one taking anything from him." "And me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Will I grow here too?" Cole looked at her with the steadiness she had learned to rely on. "You already have." Taya let out a small breath, almost a laugh, soft and warm. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and Cole lowered his chin slightly, resting it against her hair in a quiet, steady gesture of belonging. The land lay calm before them, the cabin warm behind them, and the life inside her moved with gentle insistence. Proof that something new had begun, made not from fear or desperation, but from choice and steady love. There were no questions left, no danger lurking at the edge of the story, no unfinished pieces waiting to fall apart. Just a man, a woman, and the child they brought into a world they claimed together. The story ended exactly where it needed to, in peace and certainty, and in the quiet belonging of a family finally found.